5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
Yeah, should be good. Okay, and where would you like me to sit?
Wherever you like. You can even go here if you like.
Okay. So, are there any questions before we get started? No? Okay. So,
How long do you think we'll be rolling this?
I would say anywhere between 20, 25 to 30 minutes. Okay, so there's a number of issues that the next mayor council will have to address. In your mind, where does improving infrastructure rank as a priority for you as a candidate?
Number one, it's a core service that a municipality has to provide. I've spent most of my 11-year career focusing on infrastructure. The reason I ran and was elected president of the Federation of Canadian Municipalities was precisely because of the work we were doing pushing the infrastructure idea. I was part of the Federation of Canadian Municipalities executive, vice president and president that met with the Prime Minister and then inked the deal to get the gas tax for municipalities across Canada, which equates to tens of millions of dollars each year for Winnipeg infrastructure. I'm a core service guy. That's who I am as a politician and as a city councillor. I am a fiscally responsible person and a fiscally responsible politician. I recognize that civic government cannot do everything for everybody. It's impossible. We have a federal government, we have a provincial government, both of which are graphically bigger than the city of Winnipeg government. We have to focus on what we must do. There are things we want to do and there are things we must do. We must do infrastructure. It's akin to a family paying the mortgage. You must pay the mortgage. Everything after that is debatable, I suppose, but you must pay the mortgage.
Why do you say that?
Well, there's a lot of things where there's cross jurisdictions for government. There's a lot of issues where people look at generally government for help. But Winnipeg's roads and Winnipeg's bridges, Winnipeg's sewers, I mean, we do get assistance from other levels of government. We have to. But there is no doubt that when someone is driving down the road and they hit a pothole, or they're driving down the road and the road is bumpy and uneven, or the curb is not in order, or the water infrastructure or sewer infrastructure is not working, there is no doubt whom they're holding accountable for that issue. It is the city of Winnipeg.
To what extent are you familiar with the Infrastructure Funding Council report that was released in 2011?
I'm somewhat familiar.
How would you go about implementing the recommendations from this report?
Gosh, I mean, I don't have them committed to memory, I suppose, but I recall looking at the report. I mean, the implementation of the recommendations of the report are best done, in my estimation, and again, it's one of those things where I'm always open to suggestions and ideas on best how to do this. I mean, I'm a politician, I'm a lawyer by trade. I'm not too big to say that I'd be willing to take advice on best implementation of the recommendation. My sense is that we squarely put the recommendations out on the table for council. We prioritize what's important and what folks want to do. And we do that in consultation with the proper stakeholders and the folks who have an interest in this. And we grid timeline everything out based on priority, based on funding. We look at our capital budgets, our operating budgets, and we see how everything fits together. And you come up with a plan. It takes a little bit of time to do that, but you roll through, and once everybody understands what you're doing, what the timeline is, and how you're going to recommend them, then you'll see the pieces start to unfold, I think.
If elected, how will you go about addressing the infrastructure deficit in Winnipeg?
Well, that's a very difficult question, and it requires some difficult action, I think. one thing that's not going to happen is this problem's not gonna solve itself. Winnipeggers are going to need to make some difficult choices. The City of Winnipeg Council is going to need to make some difficult choices. We've made a couple difficult choices already. We've talked about the selling of golf courses, which will be something that both creates a capital fund and creates an ongoing way to feed that capital fund. The infrastructure deficit is one that is going to be very, very difficult to address, but it can't be addressed without some rapid influx of money that doesn't exist right now. And it's got to be over a set period of time, not too long, so people have a sense that the issue is being addressed. I haven't been religiously watching the other campaigns, but I hear things from time to time. I don't know of anyone else that is proposing real measures that are going to put real money on the table. The other thing I suppose that bears mentioning is we have choices to make over the course of the next decades, immediately and over time. One of the very difficult choices I have made is I've chosen not to support the second leg of bus rapid transit, the second phase. The second phase of bus rapid transit is going to be a very, very expensive proposition for the citizens of the City of Winnipeg. I'm the only candidate who's not supporting the second phase. Obviously that's a difficult decision that's made after a lot of thought. But again, I might be the only person in this race who clearly understands that there's going to have to be hard choices that are made. If we elect to go through the $600 million adventure of the second phase of bus rapid transit, then there is going to be a lot less money for renewal of existing infrastructure.
You say that the second phase is expensive. Would you be able to explain that?
Well, it's listed as $600 million as the total cost of the second phase. It is, the City of Winnipeg's piece in that, I believe, is around $225 million. The report isn't exceptionally clear on how that's going to be paid. Well, it's not clear at all as to how that's going to be paid. It says that the decision as to how to pay it has to be made through the course of the 2015 budget process. It has been suggested in the report itself that the funding could be through some modification of a P3 model, whatever that happens to be. It could be as high as the equivalent of a 5 to 8% tax increase over the course of 30 years to cover the cost of that one project. Now, I guess arguably there's comments to be made that a bus rapid transit system properly ran could offset the cost of other infrastructure because it's taking people off the road, etc. The problem I have with the specific phase 2 is that I do not believe that is going to be the case. I do not believe that phase 2 of bus rapid transit is going to move very much traffic at all off of Pembina Highway. Regrettably, I think it's wrong-headed, and I think taking the second phase all the way up through the Parker lands and then back through the hydro right away through the industrial area, sort of back down to Pembina at Bishop Grandin, is going to essentially alienate all of the businesses and all the people that live on or near Pembina Highway. The extensive residences that live east of Pembina Highway, sort of in the Wildwood Crescent Park area, or Crescent Drive area, whatever the proper term for that area would be. I don't think it's appropriate, and I don't think it's a good use of our resources. And I've been at City Council long enough to know that when money is going one place, it's not going another place.
You mentioned the parks, the selling off the parkland. You mentioned the second phase and how you don't agree with that. Are there any other first steps, or what would be considered your first step that you would do to address the infrastructure deficit?
Well, yeah, those two projects are big projects, and they would move massive amounts of money in the near to mid-term. Everything else I mean, the cash to capital allocations, sort of moving money around the capital budget, those are fine, and I think every candidate would do those. And I think council has been trying to do that over the course of the last years already, trying to free up money and move money for infrastructure. But I have banged my head against that budget for 11 years, and I understand implicitly that trying to move and get a lot of money quickly into infrastructure is not going to be accomplished with the standard tinkering, not this time.
What will be your first step?
Within the first 2 weeks, we will bring a motion to council to discuss at a council seminar on the elimination of the second phase of bus rapid transit.
So the second phase would be your first step.
Well, that would be one of the first steps, I suppose. Yes.
Okay. Assuming you're elected mayor, what other actions do you intend to take throughout your term?
Ooh, well, there's a lot.
With regard to addressing the infrastructure deficit.
Well, the overall goal for me is to make the decision that we are going to move large amounts of capital into our infrastructure capital funding envelope. I don't see any other way to do it. Golf courses, bus rapid transit, those are the two most ready sources that exist. There are no projects that any candidate is going to be able to suggest that will come even close to moving the amount of capital in the infrastructure envelope as those two projects will do. Those two projects will dwarf anything else that any other candidate is going to do. I have some ideas on everyday maintenance, potholes, and those types of things, but that's everyday maintenance. We also have to come to some decisions as to what are we going to do from a new perspective versus a renewal perspective. And those are hard choices that we're going to have to make, and we're going to have to make them early. Are we going to focus on new projects, or are we going to focus on renewal of existing infrastructure? My inclination is that we have to fix what we have right now and make sure that it's as up to speed as possible in the near term, as opposed to focusing on new projects. But those conversations will be happening very, very quickly.
Will you raise property taxes, and if so, by what amount?
I will not raise property taxes. Winnipeggers, if you live in the city of Winnipeg, you are amongst the highest taxed person in the country of Canada. We can't wear that badge with pride. We are the recipient of transfer payments from other provinces across Canada because our provincial government, for whatever reason, cannot seem to make ends meet, despite the fact that they're $30 billion in debt and going billions of dollars deeper in debt over the course of the next years. The problem is that we are in competition for people, and we are in competition for business. We are known in Manitoba as a high regulation, high tax district. That is a terrible reputation to have in the context of business, in the context of attracting people. I was speaking to a group of students at the University of Manitoba a few months back. I asked 40 of those students, are they staying or are they going? 35 of those 40 students said they are going. They're leaving Winnipeg. The reason they stated they were leaving was because of economic opportunity. They don't see it here. I was mortified at that, of course. But if you live in the province of Manitoba, if you're a young person, if you stay here, you are taking on tens of thousands of dollars worth of per capita debt. And if you leave and go to another province, you have no responsibility for that province's debt because it's much lower. We have to be very careful. And could the city use extra money? Yes, it could. But a property tax hike of 2% raises about $8 million, $9 million. In the context of a $1.5 billion budget, that is a pittance. It's not going to make any difference to the city of Winnipeg. But it's going to hurt individual citizens, and it's going to hurt individual businesses.
What other methods would you consider to finance infrastructure renewal? Will you consider mobility charges, toll charges?
I will not consider those. I mean, again, it goes back to the reputation that our city has. We have a reputation as a high tax, high regulated area, and we do not, in any circumstances, want to augment that reputation by putting in toll roads.
What about vehicle licensing fees?
There is nothing in my platform that is going to increase regulation or cost to citizens.
What steps would you take to maximize the infrastructure dollars that are currently spent in Winnipeg?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, it comes back to me, the basis of that very good question, thank you for that, is what are we doing here? Are we expanding our infrastructure suite with new projects, or are we fixing what we have? My sense is it has to be something of a balance. We probably do need some new projects in Winnipeg, and I acknowledge that. And I probably will champion a couple myself, but the balance coming back has to be a focus on what we have. So whatever project and capital spending within our, whatever it is, $500 million of capital spending, whatever year it happens to be, the message I'm getting is, generally speaking, let's fix up our house. Let's fix our roof. Let's fix our windows that exist already before we build a new addition to our house. That's the sense that I'm getting. People want a sense of what we have is going to be in good shape. They're going to be fixed, as opposed to moving in the direction of other projects. And what worries me a little bit is we're coming back into an election cycle again. I suppose the federal government is on next year, right? And I suppose the provincial government is on the year after that, if I remember correctly. I've been to this rodeo before, and I've seen this happen every time. Every time there is an election, other orders of government, be they federal, be they provincial, they come back with, well, I want this project to go ahead. This is a shiny new project. I want to cut these ribbons here. I want this to be part of my election campaign. All very well-meaning. But I've seen it happen 1,000 times, Roland. We wind up holding the bag, the city of Winnipeg. It happens every single time. The costing is always done on a rush basis. It's done poorly. It's not costed out appropriately. There's overruns after the election is over, and guess how that goes for us. And it's awful. If I was told one example, I think of the one election where somebody had the idea to roll out the new dedicated bicycle paths and those little roundabouts that we built in the city of Winnipeg. Horribly thought out, rushed, wanted all the costing done. People weren't prepared for them. I don't want to see that happen again, and so I'm concerned about that.
You talked about P3s not too long ago.
Yep.
To what extent would you consider private-public partnerships to finance infrastructure improvements?
Well, I'm not adverse to the idea of P3 projects. I've supported some in the past. You have to be careful, though, with P3s, because while they serve a good purpose, and in my opinion, what they do is, if done properly, they can ensure the longevity of the asset over a longer period of time versus if it's just held on a design-build basis. That's the sense I get. It's all good. The whole thing is good. The one thing that you have to be careful of is the accumulated obligation or obligations that exist over time. So most times a P3 is structured that, as opposed to a design build, you're paying over time.
Right.
It's like leasing something, leasing a vehicle or whatever you have. You have to make sure that the accumulated amount of your investment isn't too much for your budget to hold.
How can infrastructure planning be improved within Winnipeg?
One main thing. We have, over the course of the last 10 years, 15 years, developed an increasing intermingling of federal, provincial, city money into infrastructure projects, which is great, has to be done. Winnipeg is 2/3 of the citizens of Manitoba, completely agree with the premise that other levels of government should be involved. The problem is that inevitably these projects get politicized, and different orders of government come with different priorities than the city of Winnipeg has. We spend a lot of money on infrastructure. My impression is that with the exception of some things that I've noticed over time, generally speaking, infrastructure projects are, through the city of Winnipeg, are designated by and large appropriately. Not perfectly, but by and large appropriately. There's systems and those sorts of things. Where it gets a little complicated is when other levels of government come in. Again, it often happens around election time with funding for different projects. A priority system and a priority goal setting exercise, for example, a 5-year capital budget, ought to be respected. And projects have a way of leaping to the front of the queue come election time. A methodology which I have proposed, which would entangle all 3 levels of government into a formal structure of respecting and recognizing City of Winnipeg priorities for infrastructure projects, would make a big difference.
How do you think that can be done?
Well, setting it up is easy enough. I don't believe the provincial government and or the federal government would be adverse to sitting down with the City of Winnipeg on a quarterly basis and saying, okay, these are our priorities. This is where we're going. We, the City of Winnipeg, want to make sure that you, the federal or provincial government, have a 100% clear understanding as to what our priorities are and what our direction is of the City of Winnipeg. We'll see you in January, we'll see you in March, we'll see you in March, we'll see you in June, we'll see you in September, we'll see you in December, and we'll augment, we'll discuss. If you have a problem with our priorities, tell us early. Let us know. We can sort of work with this sort of stuff. Don't tell us 40 days before your election that you want to do a different project that works for you for political reasons. I'm not interested in that.
How would you engage senior level of government to finance, plan, and manage infrastructure priorities in Winnipeg?
I think I just kind of answered that honestly with what I said. I don't really understand why other levels of government aren't. I mean, the federal government is more removed, so it's more difficult for them. So I have to give them a little more license to be a bit more detached to our process. I'll give them a bit more license. The province of Manitoba, with all due respect, 2/3 of the citizens that government represents lives in our municipality. It shouldn't be too much of a stretch for them to understand implicitly what we are doing and why we are doing it. Now, I recognize, in full defense to everybody, I recognize that sometimes the City of Winnipeg hasn't made the right choices, and a lot of those choices ought not be supportive. But that won't be me, I promise you. That will not be Gord Steeves if Gord Steeves is mayor. I have no political bell to ring, and I have no need for bringing attention to myself for any particular project. I've been there long enough to know exactly how this works. I will be totally upfront with the province and with the federal government and say this is what we should do. And you know what else? You want to share the credit? You want more credit? You want all of the credit? I'm fine with that. Just do the projects that we need to do.
So what would you do to improve the planning and improvement of regional infrastructure within Capital Region?
Well, a transportation authority is probably still a bit of a missing link. There's pieces that the mayors and reeves of the Capital Region have put together. There's some work that's been done, I believe, by the Chamber of Commerce and different groups that have put together these ideas. It's not fully formed, I don't think. And there still is some work to do in furtherance of that objective, and I think it will help. That won't be the end of the work, mind you. Once that is done, we're going to have to wend that work into the City of Winnipeg's capital budget infrastructure to make sure that connection exists. That will take all of the wisdom and guile of any seasoned politician or politicians to do that, because that will be a big job. Because if there are differing opinions as to what the City of Winnipeg has in mind and what a proposed transportation authority has in mind, then that's going to be a discussion. It's going to be a difficult discussion that's going to have to be had. You're going to need skilled people who are going to have to steward over that discussion and make sure that it works properly.
How do you plan to bridge those?
Well,
two?
I mean, hopefully you get a bit lucky, and hopefully it's understood, and hopefully any respectful transportation authority will make any decision they have to make within the context of their of our existing capital budget. I mean, if any transportation authority that's beyond the City of Winnipeg, that encompasses the capital region, the provinces, all those sorts of things, if they completely dismiss the capital budget of the City of Winnipeg and the priorities that exist in sort of a 6-year outlay, then I would suggest that's not dreadfully politically astute, because while I have issues with some things in the City of Winnipeg capital budget, I don't think it's completely wrong-headed. So hopefully it won't be that bad, and hopefully the bridge building won't be that much. And if I'm correct in that, which I think I will be, then you can sort of look at the gaps and the weaknesses and start to separate them, isolate them, work on them until they're fixed.
Just 2 more questions.
Sure.
Infrastructure is a broad category that refers to both core infrastructure, so bridges, roads, water lines, flood protection, and social infrastructure, such as the creation of facilities, libraries, etc. Which of these types of infrastructure would you prioritize for renewal?
Well, there's a role for the city in both of those, and I completely acknowledge that. I don't know if it's right to say the priority should be with the roads and the bridges, but the expectation of the citizens of this city is, first, make sure that our citizens and business have roads and bridges that they can drive on, right? Make sure that when I'm driving to the library or when I'm driving to the community center, that the road I'm driving on is passable. And then let's build the community centers. I mean, within the context of community centers and libraries, there's other discussions to be had in terms of prioritization, kind of amalgamation. We've gone through a lot of those very, very difficult discussions. And I would suggest that the gap between differing groups on how money should be spent in that area is wider than it is in the consensus that I believe exists on road infrastructure.
Are there any specific projects that you would prioritize over others? Which ones, and then why?
Well, I mean, again, it comes back to, I guess, new versus old, I suppose. I would prioritize existing infrastructure and infrastructure renewal. I think it's an expectation of citizens. The regional streets particularly are areas of concern for people that have to be a primary focus, and making sure that they're where we want them to be. The way in which we fix them, working with our infrastructure industry on things like 24/7 construction to make sure that we're getting on these construction sites and then getting off these construction sites as quickly as possible, to allow us both to let citizens circulate and then allow people to move on to the next project. Those two things have to be accomplished. There's a couple of bottlenecks we have in the city. The Waverley Underpass comes to mind, Waverley and Taylor. That is one infrastructure project that the city desperately needs. I believe it's being contemplated in the 6-year capital budget right now. But that is a project that appears to be causing a lot of angst and consternation for folks in that area of the city. And I mean, that Kenneson Commons, the IKEA area, the growth of White Ridge, the growth of Linden was all causing a lot of problems.
Which ones of those do you see as your priority?
Well, the Waverly Underpass in terms of new projects, I think would certainly be a priority.
Well, those are all the questions I'd like to ask. Is there anything else you'd like to add?
Yeah, there is. I mean, just, I don't know who's going to be watching this, if anybody, but people have to understand the role of their civic government. Civic government is complicated in some ways, but in other ways not really. It's important for politicians like myself, like others who are running, like existing members of city council, to focus on priorities and make sure that we're not doing too much. Because if we do too much, we can't do what we're supposed to do well. It's like any other business. It's like any other organization. It's like any other charity. You focus on your core obligation. I ask citizens to recognize that as well, if they can. That there's always going to be things that we want to do as a community. And maybe we can. But we have to recognize that anything we want to do has to be balanced against things that we must do. And if we take away from that too much, we're going to wind up with a city that we're not happy with in terms of infrastructure. It's a bit of a psychological shift that we ask everybody to sort of think about. I'll leave you with that.
And on behalf of the Manitoba Heavy Industry Association, I want to thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Thank you very much, Steve.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.